that Thomas does think that Oswald killed Tippett, but that's not really relevant to the other good information that he pulls together. It's just his conclusion based on the evidence that he's talking about. And I think that's mainly a lot of what we all do is we kind of have our interpretations of what's presented, whether it's from original documents or from what other people have presented, and then we all have our own personal opinions, and that's a positive thing rather than a negative. Okay, so there's a section that particularly intrigued me, and I think the key thing to think about is the theory that there was either more than one Oswald or imposters. So I'll go into this and start. So it's the Mexican restaurant, which specifically is this one. When Lee Harvey Oswald was apprehended, he had $13.70 on his person. One might therefore deduce that Oswald did not have an escape plan. After all, how far was he going to get on $13 and change? It wasn't as if he couldn't get his hands on additional money. Along with his wedding band, he'd left $170 cash in his wife's dresser. Alternatively, if Oswald was part of a conspiracy, then there was almost certainly an escape plan and he must have been expecting help. Thus the Warren Commission made it a point to insist, quote, "Investigation has produced no evidence that Oswald had pre-arranged plans for the means to leave Dallas after the assassination, or that any other person was to have provided him assistance in hiding or in departing the city." But the evidence was right under their noses. After leaving the book depository, Oswald took a taxi cab to Oak Cliff. The driver of the cab, William Whaley, produced a manifest which showed a pickup of a passenger in front of the bus terminal at about 12:30, which he unloaded at 500 North Beckley. Whaley testified, quote, "I asked him where he wanted to go. He said 500 North Beckley. Well, I started up. I started to that address, and the police cars, the sirens were going, running crisscrossing everywhere, just a big uproar in that end of town, and I said, what the hell? I wonder what the hell is the uproar? And he never said anything, so I figured he's one of these people that don't like to talk. So I never said any more to him. But when I got pretty close to the 500 block, Netches and North Beckley, which is the 500 block, he said, this will do fine, and I pulled over the curb right there. In point of fact, Netches does not intersect North Beckley. Whaley had actually dropped Oswald at the corner of Neely and North Beckley, 1 block shy of the 500 block, and the 3 blocks beyond his boarding house. At 500 North Beckley, the intersection of 8th and North Beckley, there was a Mexican restaurant, one of a chain called El Chico. Was Oswald to meet someone there, or just hungry for nachos? Perhaps apprehensive about what awaited him at the restaurant, Oswald scurried back to his boarding house to get his pistol. It was while briefly in his room that the police car pulled up in front and honked its horn, according to the housekeeper. Was Tippett and his partner providing security for Oswald's escape? By honking the horn, were they prodding him along? Leaving his boarding house, Oswald retraced his steps and returned to the corner of 8th and North Beckley. But instead of entering the Mexican restaurant, Oswald turned east and headed into the neighbourhood. 3 short blocks later at 10th and Patton, Tippett brought him about at gunpoint. So it was Tippett trying to retrieve Oswald and force him back to the rendezvous. So that's the issue where Thomas is his belief that Oswald did shoot Tippett. And where was Oswald headed? Jack Ruby's apartment was only 2 blocks away in the direction Oswald was headed at the intersection of Ewing and the I-35 freeway. But it is known that Ruby had gone to Parkland Hospital. I'll come back over that. We'll come back to that in a minute. That is, I believe it's in the second book. So that gives you an idea, in a simple way, of Oswald leaving the cab here. It's Star. There. The restaurant there. You've got the Texas Theatre here. The murder here. Ruby's apartment here. Oswald's boarding house here. So it gives you. I know quite a few people here have been. I haven't yet, unfortunately, but to go. So it is at least as likely that Oswald was headed to the home of one George Salazar 2 blocks further on the other side of the freeway at 3128 Harlandale. That address appears in an investigative report by Deputy Sheriff Buddy Walters. About 8 AM this morning, while in the presence of Alan Sweat, I talked to Sorrells, the head of the Dallas Secret Service. I advised him that for the past few months at a house at 3128 Harlandale, some Cubans had been having meetings on weekends and were possibly connected with the Freedom for Cuba party, of which Oswald was a member. He said, and says on the following day, quote, "I don't know what action the Secret Service has taken, but I learned today that sometime between 7 days before the president was shot and the day after he was shot, these Cubans moved from this house. My informant stated that subject Oswald had been to this house before." The Cubans meeting at the Salazar home were members of a violent anti-Castro group called Alpha 66. It was precisely this connection that led this HSCA to criticise the CIA, information regarding its assassination plots that it withheld from the Warren Commission. The critical clue was an incident that occurred shortly thereafter at the Mexican restaurant. That is a more recent photograph. That one is around the time in the 60s. I don't know if it's right in 1965. And then that one is recent. It was the next appearance of the station wagon. So, as in the station wagon that
I've been seen on some.
Craig saw in Dealey Plaza. Behind the El Chico was Mac Pate's garage, so that's at the very back on the right hand side. A mechanic named T.F. White reported the incident to the FBI. White noticed a car parked behind the restaurant with two individuals lingering nearby. The mechanic explained that his suspicions were aroused in part by the fact that emergency vehicles were racing through the neighbourhood with their sirens blaring, suggesting that the police were searching for someone. There was something surreptitious in their behaviour, such that White put down his tools and walked across the street to get a closer look. On his approach, however, the men jumped in their car and sped away, headed west on 8th Street. One of the men, according to White, who claims to have gotten a good look at his face, looked just like the man that he later saw on television accused of shooting President Kennedy. It turns out that White was not just a mechanic, he was a reserve police officer. Not only had he seen a suspicious person who looked like Oswald, as had Deputy Craig, he had taken down the licence plate number, Texas plate PP4537. On the 13th of December 1963, FBI agent Charles T. Brown, with a visit to the Dallas County Tax Office, identified the car with PP4537 as a 1957 Plymouth registered to a Carl Amos Mather of 4309 Colgate Avenue in Garland, Texas. When the agents got to the Mather house on Colgate Avenue, the car with the plate PP4537 was parked in the driveway. The car was the family station wagon, a two-tone white over faded blue in colour. Mather's wife then told the FBI that not only were her husband and Tippett very close friends, but that Carl had left work early on the day of the assassination to go to Tippett's house. Carl Mather worked at Collins Radio in Richardson, Texas. This information is particularly disturbing because Collins Radio was a front for the CIA. This was revealed when a ship leased by Collins Radio was used in Operation Armstrong, a raid by CIA-trained anti-Castro exiles on Cuba. Among these was some of the same Alpha 66 Cubans meeting at the Harlandale address in Dallas. Oswald's landlady, Mrs. Mary Bledsoe, testified to the Warren Commission that on at least 2 occasions Oswald told her that he was trying to get a job at Collins Radio. So, when I read that, it reminded me of reading James Douglas's book, JFK and the Unspeakable. At the time, I thought it was the best book in terms of explaining why Kennedy was killed. If there was, yes, the political atmosphere and why. I thought that the very end of the book was the weakest part, where he sort of digressed from that and started getting into really, really wild conspiracy theories. But that was when I read that in like 2009-10. This was like repeating it, or some of it, and although I thought at the time that was the weakest section, because somebody else had looked at it and obviously felt the same thing, that kind of got me on looking into a bit more detail. So I want to read a little bit of this bit as well, but bear in mind what I said earlier about the imposters. There's a bit of a lead into it first, which is regarding the Texas Theatre. Now, bottom left on here, you can see it, and I think this is the better, more detailed map, which again shows you how squashed together all these places are.
Which book is that from, Paul, that map?
This one I'm not sure about because it's that long ago since I saved the photo, 6 years ago when I originally started. But when I started doing fingerprints of intelligence, this is what kicked it off. I intended to do that as the first presentation. I thought, well, why do that? Let's just do all the intelligence connections. And then 6 years later, it's got to it. So I'm not 100% sure. I can find out. So you've got again, it's more detailed. You've got Oswald, where he left the cab, where his rooming house is. You've got the top, the Blocko gas station, which I've got in the photograph of as well, where obviously Tippett was waiting for somebody to come across the viaduct. You've got the Texas Theatre in the bottom left-hand corner, and then you've also got Top 10 Records, which it doesn't show on that map, but that is down there in that corner as well. You've got the place where Tippett was killed in the middle. You've also got another area which I'll come to in a minute. You've got the Kathy Coleman apartment as well, which has different connotations. Just to sort of give you the logistics, Dealey Plaza is the top right of that map that you just can't see it. You've then got the river and the viaduct over it, so you can see the path that
And there's Ruby's apartment on North Ewing as well.
bottom right, yeah. Yeah, there's a better map in a minute.
Just one point about that, Paul. I've always wondered why, if you look at that map, the other one showed it in a little bit more detail.
Yes.
Oswald's resident, 1026 North Beckley. If he actually came from there, and some people doubt that he actually went to 1026 after the assassination, but if he did, if he was going to the Texas Theatre to meet his CIA contact, which is what they did, they went to the local theatre to, if something went wrong, why didn't he go straight down the boulevard? Why did he deviate off to 10th and Patton?
Yeah, because he's probably got the rubies.
I've got a fabulous defector story that will back that up.
Well, I'm suspicious of the whole idea that he did kill Tippett.
I
don't think many of us in here think that.
Sorry?
I don't think many of us think he killed Tippett.
No. So he wasn't ever at.
He couldn't have got there anywhere in time if he did go to...
He could have actually, because I think if
Only
you
if
look
he
at
had
the
a right.
timing, well, the timing, she
not
says...
the official story.
Yeah, but the officials, if you look at as I have the document, she said that she had the telephone call from her friend and turned the TV on to hear about the Kennedy death. So actually it might not have been 1 o'clock because it could have been 10 to 1.
Yeah.
It's possible. Oh, good. But this, in terms of, if we're saying he couldn't have got there in time, maybe somebody who looked like him could have done, and that's what's related to this bit. So, Butch Burroughs, who witnessed Oswald's arrest, we've got a photo of the arrest. There's this there. Butch Burroughs, who witnessed Oswald's arrest, startled me in his interview. So this is his interview with Douglas. By saying he saw a second arrest occur in the Texas Theatre only 3 or 4 minutes later. He said the Dallas police then arrested, quote, an Oswald lookalike. Burroughs said the man looked almost like Oswald, like he was his brother or something. When I questioned the comparison by asking, could you see the second man as well as you could see Oswald? He said, yes, I could see both of them. They looked alike. After the officers half carried and half dragged Oswald to the police car in front of the theatre, within a space of 3 or 4 minutes, Burroughs saw the second Oswald placed under arrest and handcuffed. The Oswald lookalike, however, was taken by police not out the front door, but out the back of the theatre. What happened next we can learn from another neglected witness, Bernard Hare. Bernard Hare was the owner of Bernie's Hobby Horse just 2 doors east of the Texas Theatre. Hare went outside his store when he saw the police cars congregating in front of the theatre. When he couldn't see what was happening because of the crowd, he went back through his store into the alley out back. It too was full of police cars, but there were fewer spectators. Hare walked up the alley. When he stepped outside the front door of the theatre, he witnessed what he would think for decades was the arrest of Oswald. Quote, police brought a young white man out, Hare told an interviewer. The man was dressed in a pullover shirt and slacks. He seemed to be flushed as if he'd been in a struggle. Police put the man in a police car and drove off. When Hare was told in 1987 that Oswald had been brought out the front of the theatre by police, he was shocked. I don't know who I saw arrested, he said in bewilderment. Burroughs and Hare are complementary witnesses. From their perspectives, both inside and outside of the Texas Theatre, they saw an Oswald double arrested and taken to a police car in the back alley only minutes after the arrest of Oswald. Burroughs and Hare's independent, converging testimonies provide critical insight into the mechanics of the plot. In a comprehensive intelligence scenario for Kennedy's and Tippett's murders, the plan culminated in Oswald's Friday arrest and Sunday murder, probably a fallback from his being set up to be killed in the Texas theatre by the police. There is a hint of the second Oswald's arrest in the Dallas police records. According to the Dallas Police Department's official homicide report on Tippett, quote, suspect was later arrested in the balcony of the Texas Theatre at 231 West Jefferson. Of course, Oswald, the altercation with McDonald, was on the floor. Dallas Police Detective L.D. Stringfellow also reported to Captain W.P. Ganaway Oswald was arrested in the balcony of the Texas Theatre. To whom are the homicide report and Detective Stringfellow referring? Oswald was arrested in the orchestra, not the balcony. Are these documents referring to the Dallas Police Department's second arrest at the Texas Theatre that afternoon? Was Butch Burroughs witnessing the arrest of the Oswald lookalike that actually began at the balcony? That would have likely been the double's hiding place after he entered the theatre without pain, thereby drawing attention to himself and leading the police to the apprehension of his likeness, Lee Harvey Oswald, who was already inside. As Burroughs pointed out, anyone coming in the front of the theatre could head immediately up the stairs to the balcony without being seen from the concession stand. The Oswald double, after having been put in the police car in the alley, must have been driven a short distance and released on higher intelligence orders. Speculation there. Unfortunately for the plotters, he was seen again soon. With the scapegoat, Oswald, now safely in custody, we can presume that the double was not supposed to be seen again in Dallas, or anywhere else. Had he not been seen, the CIA's double Oswald strategy in an Oak Cliff shell game might have eluded independent investigators forever. But thanks to other key witnesses who have emerged, we now have detailed evidence that the double was seen again, not just once, but twice. At 2 p.m, as Oswald sat handcuffed in the back seat of a patrol car, boxed in by police officers on his way to jail, Oswald knew what final role had been chosen for him in the assassination scenario. That night, being led through police headquarters, he would shout out to the press, "I'm just a patsy." Also, though, at about 2 p.m, a man identified as Oswald, was seen in a car 8 blocks away from the Texas Theatre, still very much at large and keeping a low profile. The sharp-eyed auto mechanic spotted him. T.F. White was a 60-year-old long-time employee of Mac Pate's garage in the Oak Cliff section of Dallas. While White worked on the automobile the afternoon of the assassination, he could hear police sirens screaming up and down Davis Street only a block away. He also heard radio reports describing a suspect then thought to be in Oak Cliff. The mechanic looked out the open doors of the garage. He watched as a red 1961 Falcon drove into the parking lot of the El Chico restaurant across the street. The Falcon parked in an odd position after going a few feet into the lot. The driver remained seated in the car. White said later, the man in the car appeared to be hiding. White kept his eye on the man in the Falcon. When Mac Pate returned from his lunch a few minutes later, White pointed out to his boss the oddly parked Falcon with its waiting driver, who seemed to be hiding. Pate told White to watch the car carefully, reminding him of earlier news reports they had heard about a possible assassination attempt against President Kennedy in Houston the day before, involving a red Falcon. White walked across the street to investigate. He halted about 10 or 15 yards from the car. He could see the driver was wearing a white t-shirt. The man turned toward White and looked at him full face. White stared back at him. Not wanting to provoke a possible assassin, White began a retreat to the garage. However, he paused, took a scrap of paper from his overalls pocket and wrote down the Texas plate of the car, PP4537. That night, while T.F. White was watching television with his wife, he recognised the Dallas Police Department's prisoner, Lee Harvey Oswald, as the man he had seen in the red Falcon in El Chico's parking lot. White was unfazed by what he did not yet know, that at the same time he had seen one Oswald sitting freely in the Falcon, the other Oswald was sitting handcuffed in the Dallas police car on his way to jail. Mrs. White, fearing the encompassing arms of a conspiracy, talked her husband out of reporting his information to the authorities. Thus, the Oswald sign in the parking lot might have escaped history, but for the fact White was confronted by an alert reporter. On December the 4th, 1963, Wes Wise, a Dallas newscaster whose specialty was sports, gave a luncheon talk to the Oak Cliff Exchange Club at El Chico's restaurant. At the urging of his listeners, he changed his topic from sports to the president's assassination, which Wise had covered. He described to his luncheon audience how he, as a reporter, had become a part of Jack Ruby's story. Wise's encounter with the man he knew as a news groupie came on the grassy knoll the day before Ruby shot Oswald. Wise had just completed a sombre day after the assassination radio newscast from the site banked with wreaths. While he sat in his car in silent reflection beside the book depository, he heard a familiar voice call out, "Hey, Wes!" As Wise told the story, I turned to see the portly figure of a man in a dark suit, half waddling, half trotting as he came toward me. He was wearing a fedora-style hat, which would later become familiar and famous. Jack Ruby was making his way along the grassy knoll from the direction of the railroad tracks, perhaps precisely where the day before, as Ed Hoffman watched, another man in a suit had fired a rifle at the president. An hour and a half after, Julianne Mercer saw a man dropped off by Jack Ruby carrying a rifle up at the same site. Ruby leaned into Wise's car window and said, his voice breaking with tears in his eyes, I just hope they don't make Jackie come to Dallas for the trial. That would be terrible for that little lady. In retrospect, Wise wondered if Ruby was trying to set him up for a radio interview, to go on record the day before with his famous motive for murdering Oswald. Although Wise had no interest then in interviewing Jack Ruby, he had already just been told enough for him to be called as a witness at Ruby's trial. He would be subpoenaed as a Ruby witness by both the prosecution and the defence. His testimony at the trial, quoting what Ruby said to him the day before Ruby murdered Oswald, would then be cited in Life magazine. At the end of Wise's talk to his absorbed audience at the Oak Cliff Exchange Club, Mac Pate, who had walked across the street from his garage to listen, gave the newscaster a new lead. He told Wise about his mechanic having seen Oswald. Wise asked to go immediately with Pate to speak with his employee. As Wise told me in an interview 4 decades later, he then put a little selling job on Mr. White to reveal what he'd seen. Wise said to the Brooklyn auto mechanic, well, you know, we're talking about the assassination of the President of the United States here. Convinced of his duty, White took Wise into El Chico's parking lot and walked him step by step through his full-face encounter with Oswald. Wise realised the car had been parked at the centre of Oswald's activity in Oak Cliff that afternoon. 1 block from where Oswald got out of the taxi, 6 blocks south of his rooming house, 8 blocks north of his arrest at the Texas Theatre, and only 5 blocks from Tippett's murder on a route in between. Taking notes on his luncheon invitation, Wise said, I just wish you had gotten the licence number. White reached into his pocket and took out a scrap of paper with writing on it. He handed it to Wise. This is it, he said. Newscaster Wes Wise notified the FBI of White's identification of Oswald in the car parked in the El Chico lot and cited the licence plate number. FBI agent Charles T. Brown Jr. reported from an interview with Milton Love, Dallas County Tax Office, 1963 Texas license plate PP 4537 was issued for a 1957 Plymouth automobile in possession of Carl Amos Mather, 4309 Garland Street, Texas. Colgate Street, Garland, Texas. Agent Brown then drove to that address. He reported that the 1957 Plymouth bearing licence plate PP 4537 was parked in the driveway of Mather's home in Garland, a suburb of Dallas. Thus arose the question of how a licence plate for Carl Mather's Plymouth came to be seen on the Falcon in El Chico's parking lot with a man in it who looked like Oswald. The FBI had also discovered that Carl Amos Mather did high security communications work for Collins Radio, a major contractor with the Central Intelligence Agency. 3 weeks before Kennedy's assassination, Collins Radio had been identified on the front page of the New York Times as having just deployed a CIA radar ship on an espionage and sabotage mission against Cuba. Collins also held a government contract for installing communication towers in Vietnam. In 1971, Collins Radio would merge with another giant military contractor, Rockwell International. In November 1963, Collins was at the heart of the CIA military contracting business for state-of-the-art communication systems. Carl Mather had represented Collins at Andrews Air Force Base by putting special electronics equipment into Vice President Lyndon Johnson's Air Force 2 plane. Given the authority of his CIA-linked security clearance, Carl Mather refused to speak to the FBI. The FBI instead questions his wife, Barbara Mather, who stunned them. Her husband, she said, was a good friend of J.D. Tippit. In fact, the Mathers were such close friends of Tippit and his wife that when J.D. was murdered, Marie Tippit phoned them. According to his wife, Carl Mather left work that afternoon at 3:30 and returned home. Carl and Barbara Mather then drove to the Tippit home where they consoled Marie Tippit on the death of her husband, killed by a man identical to the one seen a few minutes later, 5 blocks away, in a car bearing the Mathers licence plate number. 15 years after the assassination, Carl Mather did finally consent to an interview for the first time with the House Select Committee on Assassinations, but on condition that he be granted immunity from prosecution. The electronics specialist could not explain how his car's licence number could have been seen on the Falcon with its Oswald-like driver in the El Chico lot. The HSCA dismissed the incident as, quote, the Wise allegation, in which a confused auto mechanic had jotted down a coincidentally connected licence plate as alleged by a reporter. The odds against White having come up with the exact licence plate of a CIA-connected friend of J.D. Tippit were too astronomical for comment and were given none. What kept the Wise allegation from sinking into total oblivion over the years was the persistent conscience of Wes Wise, who in 1971 was elected mayor of Dallas. During his 2 terms as mayor, 1971 to 76, Wise guided Dallas out from under the cloud of the assassination, at the same time saved the Texas School Book Depository from imminent destruction and preserving it for further research into the president's murder. In the fall of 2005, I interviewed Wes Wise, who recalled vividly T.F. White's description of his confrontation with a man looking like Oswald in the El Chico parking lot. Wise said he was so struck by the incident he returned to the El Chico lot on a November 22nd afternoon, years later, to reenact the scene with similar lighting and a friend sitting in an identically parked car. Standing on the spot where White had with the same degree of afternoon sunlight, Wise confirmed that one could easily recognise a driver's features from the full face. Look at that distance, irrespective of whether the car's window was up or down. The possible significance of what he had learned stayed with Wise during his years as a reporter and as Dallas mayor, in spite of its repeated dismissal by federal agencies. Knowing the value of evidence, Mayor Wise preserved not only the Texas School Book Depository but also the December 4th, 1963 luncheon invitation in which he'd immediately written down T.F. White's identification of the licence plate on the Oswald car. Producing it from his files during our interview, Wise read to me over the phone T.F. White's exact identification of the licence plate, as the auto mechanic had shown it to the reporter on the scrap of paper taken from his overalls pocket, and as Wise had then copied it down on his luncheon interview. It was indeed PP4537. At the end of our conversation, Mayor Wise reflected for a moment on the question posed by Lee Harvey Oswald's presence elsewhere at the same time as T.F. White saw him in El Chico's parking lot, in a car whose licence plate could now be traced, thanks to the scrupulous note-taking of White and Wise, to the employee of a major CIA contractor. Well, he said, you're aware of the idea of 2 Oswalds, I guess. Douglas then goes on to talk about the Robert Vincent story in Area 51, which I don't really subscribe to. However, the Collins radio stuff seemed worthy of more research, and this is where I was in 2013, which I then backtracked and went all the way back to the very start, partly what Gene's already talked about. So in researching it, and repeating that research more recently, it goes to show again, is what always surprises me about the Kennedy assassination is how much information there is in plain sight. If you do a Google search for Collins Radio, the top link is the Wikipedia page for Rockwell Collins. Click it and the link states, Rockwell Collins was a multinational company headquartered in Cedar Rapids, Iowa, providing avionics and information technology systems and services to government agencies and aircraft manufacturers. The company was acquired by United Technologies Corporation on November 27th, 2018, and now operates as part of Collins Aerospace. You scroll down, and the very next paragraph under the heading History says, quote, Arthur A. Collins founded Collins Radio Company in 1933 in Cedar Rapids. It designed and produced both shortwave radio equipment and equipment for the burgeoning AM broadcast industry. Collins was solicited by the military, the scientific community, and by the larger AM radio stations for special equipment. Collins supplied the equipment to establish a communication link with the South Pole expedition of Rear Admiral Richard E. Byrd in 1933. Byrd?
Yeah, B-Y-R-D.
Yeah. Wikipedia states that, quote, Rear Admiral Byrd was an American naval officer and explorer. He was a recipient of the Medal of Honor, the highest honor for valor given by the United States, and was a pioneering aviator, polar explorer, and organizer of polar logistics. Byrd. I said to myself, that sounds familiar. I'm thinking it can't be that easy, can it? Well, it is that easy. Search for Texas School Book Depository, and it confirms that it was purchased on July the 4th, 1939 by D. Howell Byrd. What does his Wikipedia page say? Quote, David Harold Dryhall Byrd was a noted Texas producer of petroleum and co-founder of the Civil Air Patrol. Byrd's cousin, polar explorer Richard E. Byrd, named Antarctica's Howell Byrd Mountains for him. So you've got Collins Radio, Civil Air Patrol, the Book Depository, Big Oil. Of course, that leads to the military-industrial complex, Ferry, Oswald, and a whole lot more. So, Collins Radio specifically, the best research I've found online is by Bill Kelly, who's contacted Pete because of it being advertised, and I am going to contact him after today. The only way I can do it justice is to read you an extract of an updated version of a presentation he gave at the 1994 COPA conference. So, this is verbatim from Bill Kelly. The significance of the Collins radio connections becomes apparent with a quick review of the published record. On November the 1st, 1963, the New York Times published a photograph of the ship Rex, which Fidel Castro identified as the boat that dropped off a team of assassins in Cuba a few nights previous. The Rex was docked at Palm Beach, Florida, near the JFK family compound, and the Rex Halloween Eve mission was in clear violation of Kennedy's March 1963 edict that no paramilitary raids against Cuba were to originate from US shores. According to the article in the New York Times, the Rex had been sold by the Somoza regime in Nicaragua to the Belcher Oil Company. Its dock fees, paid by the CIA front company Seaship Inc., with the Rex then being leased to the Collins Radio Company of Richardson, Texas, for, quote, scientific research. Collins Radio became a major defence contractor during World War II, and following the war participated in Operation Paperclip, hiring Dr. Alex Lippisch, the former Nazi scientist, to develop the Delta I glider and M163 Comet jet fighter. For Collins, Lippisch was assigned to the boat development program that worked with General Dynamics in attempting to build and refine a sleek, swift speedboat, the V-20, that could be used for Cuban infiltration missions like the Rex mission. It was later used in Vietnam. David Ferry's telephone records reflect that in the weeks before the assassination he made frequent calls from the New Orleans law office of G. Ray Gill to the Belcher Oil Company of Dallas, Texas, the company that was listed as the owner of Rex. In the week before the assassination, a reservation was made at Jack Ruby's Carousel Club for a large party of Collins Radio employees. The Dallas Police Department Intelligence Division maintained a paid informant who worked at Collins Radio and reported on fellow employees who appeared suspicious or subversive, including one who was reported to subscribe to the leftist I.F. Stone Weekly. When Lee Harvey Oswald returned to Texas from Soviet Russia, George de Mohrenschildt introduced him to retired Navy Admiral Chester Bruton, an executive at Collins Radio, with the idea of Oswald getting a job there, as he had worked in a radio factory in Minsk. Oswald and Marina visited Bruton with de Mohrenschildt. At the time of the assassination, Admiral Bruton was working on a top-secret nuclear submarine communications project for Collins, with the Navy's nuclear sub-radar and communications HQ being based at Woods Hole, Massachusetts, close neighbours of Michael Payne's family island. In 1963, Collins Radio began receiving large military contracts, including one for the construction of a microwave communications network in Southeast Asia, specifically Vietnam. And this is the kicker, which it's probably my favourite thing across the whole subject. After Oswald was murdered while in Dallas police custody by Jack Ruby, his widow, Marina Oswald, married Collins employee Kenneth Porter. Collins Radio supplied and maintained the equipment used by the Voice of America, all manned NASA space flights, the Strategic Air Command, as well as all equipment used for the CIA's Guatemalan and Cuban operations. Most significantly, Collins Radio was responsible for installing and maintaining all radio equipment aboard Air Force One, Air Force Two and the Cabinet plane. According to the Collins Radio annual report to stockholders for 1963-64, Collins Radio not only installed and maintained the radios aboard most military and executive branch planes, they also operated the station known as Liberty at their Cedar Rapids, Iowa headquarters, which served as a relay station for all radio communications between the White House, the Pentagon, Air Force One, Air Force Two, the Cabinet plane and Andrews Air Force Base in Washington. This Liberty station is misidentified on most transcripts of the edited version of the radio transmissions from Air Force One on November 22nd, 63. Air Force One, the presidential airplane, was placed in service in 1962 using communications equipment developed and manufactured by Collins. The aircraft was modified to meet special requirements in 1962. The station many remember as Liberty was opened and operated from the new communications building in Iowa. Collins had a contract with the Air Force to serve as either the primary communications station or as a backup whenever Air Force One and other aircraft in the fleet carried cabinet members or high-ranking military officials. Over the airwaves, the station's call word was Liberty. In his book The Making of a President, 1964, Theodore White wrote, "There is a tape recording in the archives of the government which best recaptures the sound of the hours as it waited for leadership. It is a recording of all the conversations in the air monitored by the Signal Corps Midwestern Center, Liberty, between Air Force One in Dallas, the cabinet plane over the Pacific, and the Joint Chiefs Communications Center in Washington. On the flight, the party learned that there was no conspiracy, learned the identity of Oswald and his arrest, and the President's mind quickly turned to the duties of consoling the stricken and guiding the quick." According to the analysis of Martin Schatz and Vincent Salandria, quote, "Yet the White House had informed President Johnson and the other occupants of Air Force One, all of them witnesses to the hail of bullets which had poured down on Dealey Plaza, that as of the afternoon of the assassination there was to be no conspiracy and that Oswald was to be the lone assassin. If White's report was correct, this would mean that the federal officials in Washington were marrying the government to the cover-up of Oswald as the lone assassin virtually instantaneously. This could have occurred only if these federal authorities had had foreknowledge that the evidence would implicate Oswald and that he would have no confederates. An innocent government could not have reacted in such a fashion internally. Unfortunately, there's no longer a tape recording in the archives of the government, as the original unedited multiple tape recordings of the Air Force One radio transmissions cannot be located despite an act of Congress, the request of the Assassinations Records Review Board and numerous Freedom of Information Act requests. The government seems to have simply lost the recordings, with no records being kept of their whereabouts or destruction, if in fact they were destroyed. The final report of the ARRB notes, White House Communications Agency was and is responsible for maintaining both secure and unsecured telephone, radio and telex communications between the President and the government of the United States. Most of the personnel that constitute this elite agency are US military communications specialists. Many in 1963 were from the Army Signal Corps. On November 22nd, the White House Communications Agency was responsible for communications between and among Air Force One and Two, the White House Situation Room, the Mobile White House, and with the Secret Service in the motorcade. The review board sought to locate any audio recordings of voice communications to or from Air Force One on the day of the assassination, including communications between Air Force One and Andrews Air Force Base during the return flight from Dallas to Washington. As many people are now aware, in the 70s the LBJ Presidential Library released edited audio cassettes of the unsecured or open voice conversations with Air Force One, Andrews, the White House Situation Room, the cabinet aircraft carrying the Secretary of State and other officials, on November 22nd. The LBJ Library version of these tapes consists of about 110 minutes of voice transmissions, but the tapes are edited and condensed, so the review board staff sought access to unedited, uncondensed versions. Since the edited versions of the tapes contain considerable talk about both the forthcoming autopsy of the President as well as the reaction of a government in crisis, the tapes are of considerable interest to assassination researchers and historians. Given that the LBJ Library released the tapes in the 70s, the paper trail is now sketching quite cold. The LBJ Library staff is fairly confident that the tapes originated with the White House Communications Agency. The library staff told the review board staff that it received the tapes from the White House as part of the original shipment of President Johnson's papers in 1968 and 1969. According to the LBJ Library's documentation, the accession cards reads WHCA question mark and is dated 1975. The review board staff could not locate any records indicating who performed the editing or when or where. The review board's repeated written and oral inquiries of the White House Communications Agency did not bear any fruit. The WHCA could not produce any records that eliminated the provenance of the edited tapes. At the time Kelly delivered his report on the Collins radio connections to the National Corporate Conference in Washington in October 1994, the Washington Post had just then exposed the true occupant of a new mammoth suburban Virginia building. It was not the headquarters for Collins Radio at Rockwell International, as had been previously reported, but they had just seen the cooperating cover company for the super-secret National Reconnaissance Office, just as Collins Radio had served as a cover for the CIA in the operation of the Rex in Cuba in 1963. And then the last, well, I'll read it all verbatim. Also in October 1998 issue of John F. Kennedy Jr.'s George magazine, David Wise reported on how the NRO had lost $6 billion in US taxpayer money and specifically mentioned the fiasco surrounding the construction of the HQ building, of which Collins Rockwell served as a cover company. Arthur Collins was actually in Dallas at the trademark waiting for the president when he was killed. As director of the Research Center of the Southwest, a conglomerate of Texas defense contractors and local colleges and university engineering departments, Collins Research Center was to be honoured at the trademark, and it's literally mentioned in the first paragraph of JFK's undelivered speech. The batch of records released in 2017 under the JFK Act include a number of new records that were declared not believed relevant by the ARRB, but are indeed relevant, as they detail the close collaboration among the Texas defense contractors, not only in the establishment of the Research Center of the Southwest, but also in overseas operations with the CIA and National Security Agency. So it's all a coincidence, basically. There's the gas station, and there's a much bigger version of that map. I think when I originally saved it, it's from either Posner's book or at least somebody that believes that Oswald was the lone assassin. That version I've got from Armstrong, John Armstrong's website. It's a smaller. The original's much bigger, but it's an actual photograph, as you can see, and it gives you more of an idea of the various places that we've seen already in the earlier photographs. You can see the route, where Tippett's murdered, where he's out of the taxi, the theatre's down here. And just when you compare that to give you an idea of the earlier.
I'm wondering whether that map is from Into the Nightmare.
This one, or the...
No.
That one? Yes, yes, I think it might be. That might be the... Yeah, because I've only got that on ebook.
Looks
Yes.
familiar.
Yeah. So, there you have it.
Is the other one from Myers? Is it from Dale Myers, the other one?
It could. One of them could be from Myers. As I said, I started it so long ago. My notes aren't the best, so I'm not quite sure. They're all on an old drive that I managed to dig out. But regardless, they're accurate. Whatever the person's who's created its belief is, it just gives people an idea of how small this area is, and all of these individual instances. You've got Jack Ruby's apartment in the bottom right hand corner. You've got where Tippett's waiting at the gas station for somebody coming over the viaduct. You've got Oswald's rooming house. You've got where he got out of the car. You've got El Chico where this incident's happened. You've got the Texas Theatre where Oswald, or more than one Oswald's arrested. You've got the, just off the top 10 records, you can actually see it there. I knew it was on one of them. Here. And then right in the middle is where Tippett's killed.
Isn't that estate that Harry Olsen was guarding? That's on that map.
Yes, it probably is, yes.
A bit further towards R.L. Thornton, I think.
Yeah. So, I don't know.
To
Sums it up.
A lot to
Throw
take,
more,
a lot to take in.
throw more stuff into all that soup. Bart was done an interview with somebody on and put it on the DPUK Facebook page just last week, not long ago. I don't know when he did the interview, but the guy that he was talking to was exposing all the lies and the falsities of framing Oswald, and the bus journey blocked at Dealey Plaza with the traffic jam,
Taking it back to us.
with Mary Bledsoe, and her testimony is all completely false, and the bus ticket stuff is, so he was pointing at Craig's Oswald running down the knoll into the car and gone off. The taxi and the bus being complete frame up. Also frame up was the arrest at the Texas Theatre, where he was frisked, as he must have been, either in the theatre or, you know, especially as he's supposed to have had his shooter, which is. But when he was put up at 4 o'clock in the Dallas Police Department, arrested round about 2 o'clock, say, and then he was going to be put in a lineup at 4 o'clock, and he was frisked again, and that's when they found supposedly a fistful of shells in his pocket, which, you know, and it's just, and it's it should still be there on thing. It's worth listening to. Difficult, sounds a bit difficult to keep in.
That actually reminds me of what I was going to say earlier about, from Stuart's presentation, about the bullets that actually were found on Sahan's car with wood on them that matched the
door frame.
Well, I don't know about the matching the door frame, but it was a bit suspicious that the only bullets that they were able to match to have been fired from Sahan's gun would just happened to be lying in his car with wood on. So how they dug them out? Are they the actual bullets that they've dug out of the door frames?
Ballistics evidence with Sahan is just complete. Again, it's just complete
He
frame.
knows he thinks it was a stitch
Sort
up,
of
so
frame.
Yes,
you know.
But yeah, I mean, Bill Kelly's work, he is the expert on this. So I can't really share anything that he hasn't already
I
done.
dare say, but I mean, he's asked, so I'll just.
Yeah, no, absolutely, yeah.
And if you want, give us your email,
Yeah,
email address, and I'll send it to Bill, and I'll plug it both.
Yeah, we'll do that.
His stuff's very good.
It's
and
fantastic.
number of
He's got
topics.
even on everything.
I'm not, yeah, he's good.
Yes,
He's
very
very good.
Very
Well with written.
A lot of his stuff, I remember just reading a lot of his stuff, like Education Forum, like
Yeah,
it was
that's what
10
I've-
years
that's
ago
what
or
I've
longer.
seen.
Yeah, yeah. And he's quite reasonable. He's not somebody
No, he's not
that starts throwing
No,
elbows
no.
and things
No,
like
he's
that.
alright, he's
Yeah.
alright, sound.
How long after the assassination did Marina marry that guy from Port?
It was pretty soon.
I got the impression, I thought it might have been years in the 70s, but
No,
I'm
it
sure, did he say
wasn't.
it shortly after?
Yeah, it was about
It's not long.
18 months ago. But I ought to preface this thing. One thing I was going to include, bearing in mind they're very young, and that when you're very young, an hour seems a long time. She genuinely says, and they question her on it, we had to wait a whole 10 days before we could get married. And she wasn't saying that with anything. That's the mindset of what you're like when you're 19. So the fact that she got married, I did the same thing. I went and married the guy who got out of the Marines, you know. So I went along with it. So the fact that she got married, he was riding along on a horse when she met him. And it was about 18 months afterwards. And then they got divorced. And they've lived together ever since.
Good port.
Yeah, they got divorced. Yeah.
Was
they
it a
got
white
divorced.
horse?
Sorry?
Was it a white horse and was he wearing a helmet?
He was wearing a Stetson, I think, and he came past.
Oh, close enough.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
And,
White horse.
Yeah, so they had massive arguments. She was very violent, and the judge said she was done for, and he's a big guy, aggression against the husband. And the judge suggested they ought to get a divorce. They did get a divorce, and then they lived together and still live together. So life is strange.
This is Marion Oswald's case.
Talking about horses, Sahan was supposed to be
Oh, yeah,
buying.
the horse.
We mentioned
Yeah.
that this one as well.
Paul and I love the horse thing.
Yes. Do you think there's something in the horse side? I mean,
I
he seemed to have still been involved with it, despite this accident and the fact that he'd given up riding and he could no longer be a
This is
jockey.
why I was so disappointed by Lisa Peace's book, because I thought it was going to be...
Oh, get the horse in.
Well, it focused on, I thought, the wrong things and too much detail. I was expecting something much more along the lines that Melanson had written a long time earlier, and I wanted to read something that had sort of was an overview and was then an update of the things that have happened since Melanson's book. I don't know if the one that you mentioned from last year or the year before, if that does it.
Yeah.
But there is a book, John Hunt, who died recently, that's I've seen various places online mentioned that he was working on something quite vast, that's quite technical in terms of the brain injuries to Bobby and all this kind of thing, and that's supposed to be coming out. I don't have a title, but look out for that. Interesting. In terms of Collins, I think there's something there. It's a bit suspicious.
It was a CIA fund.
Well, it was. So
They used to create these companies just
Yeah.
to.
Agency for International Development, all of that. So,
Yeah, I'm going to mention some of that because that comes up in the defective thing. And by the way, I've got an elephant and a mysterious cat and all sorts of things. Don't worry about it. I haven't got a horse yet.
Forget the
I'm sure I'll
horse,
find
yeah.
it. Actually, can I just follow up on radios? Something I read the other day whilst doing this. Was that Oswald, I've never looked at it, he wrote all this story about his life in unbelievable detail, and he goes on about how many radios were stocked in Minsk, and they were from the American exhibition. They've then gone to the Mexican exhibition, I forgot to mention that one. Khrushchev was so angry at their poor quality that he deemed that they should never be seen again. Hence, I then started putting together, oh shit, they actually took them back to the factory, and I can't remember, it does say how many of them were stacked there. So they were considered incredibly poor quality, so much so
The Russian radios.
that particular one they were doing in his factory, and also at that time they were suffering. The reason they had to hide them was there was such a surplus because nobody wanted them. The price, even the Russians didn't want them because TVs were coming in, hence why they were stacked. So the fact, then you have to ask yourself, the fact they've sent him to this factory that is basically producing stuff nobody wants, but they're having to pay him because it's Russia.
I can remember when I went to a conference in the USSR in 1985, in your hotel room, there was a notice that said, be sure to unplug the TV set at night before you go to bed. It was in several languages, because they tend to catch fire, even if they're off.
Yeah, but the hi-fi industry now, and there's still some, like the old, who was it, used to produce the valve amplifiers.
Marshall?
No, there's some famous, well, when I was a youngster, they were all valves in those days, but the only people supplying the industry now are the Russians.
well,
If you
yeah.
buy- yeah, if
Well,
you
why?
buy-
What has been before? That's China. Yeah.
Sorry, which industry?
the valve industry.
Oh, valve. Yeah,
Valve,
well,
yeah.
where are you going, unless you have an antique piece of...
Well, a lot of people in hi-fi still use valve
Yeah,
amplifiers.
yes, I know.
The old Class A amplifiers.
Sadly, we have several in our house. I wish we'd could sell them.
Vinyls come all the way back as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
My
I
husband
still
was going
use
to
my
throw one of the
vinyls.
amps away, looked online,
We are buying
and he said,
cassettes
well,
again.
it was about 1,600 quid, sell it, I said. He said.
I'm getting palpitations about bloody treason again, which
Oh.
I gave away at the library.
Oh, that's
Oh no,
fantastic.
that's
I've got
Stuart.
two copies,
Oh.
and I gave one away at the
Did
library.
you?
in
They're
Boston.
worth a fortune
I
now.
know.
I paid $100.
No, more than that.
I think I paid £3
Yeah.
for mine.
How much?
It was from one of my first books. I paid just
Was it?
a hand.
Twyman, was it?
Yeah,
No,
Twyman,
Twyman,
just a few
yeah,
pounds.
yeah.
Anyway,
Good doorstep as well.
very good.
Well, it's not-
Not as good as reclaiming history for keeping the dark.
No.
Excuse me, Bugliosi on Robert F. Kennedy, he did a fabulous. So when I was a law student, I followed him. He was obviously asleep because I was going through Manson trial and stuff at the
Yes.
time. So there's a hell of a lot of good. Even Bart would have to admit, there's the research in that book. There's a hell of a lot of brilliant things.
Mm.
Doesn't mean that it's.
He did it the wrong way around to redeem himself. He should have done
Yeah,
his own work later
yeah.
in life.